Right now, you are wearing something. You probably spent about 5 seconds deciding what it would be this morning. Maybe you grabbed whatever was on top of the pile. Maybe you checked the temperature outside first. Either way, you covered your body before you left the house because that is simply what humans do. Every culture on this planet, in every climate, in every era we have any record of, wears something. You probably assume the reason is obvious. Modesty, protection, warmth. None of those are actually the real answer. And once you understand what actually pushed early humans to start covering their bodies, it changes the way you think about fashion, about identity, and about what kind of creature you actually are. Let's lay out the timeline first. Anatomically, modern humans have existed for roughly 300,000 years. But when you look at the physical evidence, things like bone needles and hide-scraping tools, those only start appearing in the record around 120,000 years ago. And even that number is a generous estimate. Most researchers who study ancient textiles place the widespread adoption of clothing closer to 75,000 years ago, which means for at least the first half of our existence as a species, we were walking around essentially naked, under the same African sun, dealing with thorns and biting insects and cold nights with nothing but bare skin. And that fact alone rules out the most obvious explanation. Warmth. Yes, humans eventually pushed into colder climates where clothing became a genuine necessity, but clothing shows up in the record before that migration happens, while our ancestors were still living in the tropics. So warmth mattered, but it mattered later, not first. The next explanation people usually reach for is protection. Thorns, sharp rocks, insect bites, and that is part of the picture too. But here's the problem with that theory. If protection from the environment were the primary driver, clothing should have appeared first on the parts of the body that actually take the most physical damage. Feet and hands. Instead, in nearly every early culture we have evidence for, the earliest coverings went over the torso and the groin, some of the least exposed, least damaged parts of the body. That is not a practical decision. That points towards something else entirely. Then there is the lice evidence, and this one is genuinely strange. Back in the early 2000s, a team of geneticists studied something most people never think about: lice. Specifically, the genetic split between head lice and body lice. Head lice live in hair. Body lice live exclusively in fabric. They cannot survive without clothing to nest in. So researchers traced backward using the rate of genetic mutation to figure out roughly when these two separate lice populations split apart from a single common ancestor. The answer came out to approximately 170,000 years ago. That is the oldest hard biological timestamp we have for clothing, and it didn't come from a needle or a scraper. It came from a parasite that had to evolve a whole new way of living once humans gave it fabric to live in. That number tells us clothing was already an established, consistent behavior by that point, but it still doesn't tell us why it started. The true origin sits somewhere even further back than we can currently measure with hard evidence. Here is where researchers have started arguing something different. Clothing may never have been a practical invention at all. It may have been a symbolic one first. In the late 2000s, an archaeologist named Ian Gilligan published a detailed argument connecting clothing to the structure of human thought itself. His case was that choosing to cover your body isn't purely a practical act. It reflects a kind of thinking that separates humans from every other animal on the planet. To wear clothing at all, you first have to imagine a future version of yourself. You look at a raw animal hide, picture yourself wearing it later, work out how to shape it into something usable, and then actually build it. That sounds simple, but it isn't. It requires memory, planning, and thinking about a future that hasn't happened yet. That is the exact same mental machinery we use to keep a promise, plan tomorrow, or worry about something that might never occur. No other animal does this. A chimpanzee does not look at a leaf and consider how useful it might be next week. We did. And the moment humans began covering their bodies, they weren't only protecting skin. They were demonstrating, for possibly the first time, that they could think ahead. Clothing may be one of the earliest physical fingerprints of the modern human mind. 2 days. But underneath even that, there is something deeper still, something most discussions of this topic skip entirely. Shame, not in a religious sense, in a neurological one. The awareness of being watched, the sense that your body is being seen and judged by someone else. That experience appears to be uniquely human. It relies on something psychologists call theory of mind, the ability to step outside your own head and imagine what you look like through somebody else's eyes. Dogs don't have this. Crows don't have this. Even chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, show only the faintest traces of it. But somewhere in our evolutionary path, humans developed the ability to genuinely see themselves the way others see them. And once that ability existed, everything shifted. Covering the body stopped being purely about survival. It became about how you were perceived and what you were signaling to the people around you. From that point forward, clothing wasn't just a barrier against the world. It became a tool for shaping identity, a way to actively control your own image. The very first person who wrapped an animal hide around their body wasn't only trying to stay warm. In a real sense, they were choosing how they wanted to be seen, and once that idea existed, it never disappeared. You can trace it across cultures all over the world, even in places where clothing served no purpose for warmth at all, deep in the Amazon, across islands in the Pacific. People still decorated themselves. Beads, paint, feathers, woven fiber, tattoos. Something was always present because the human body was never treated as just a body. Researchers studying clothing traditions across many different cultures have noticed something consistent. The impulse to dress seems to intensify specifically during periods when human social groups grow more complex. As communities expanded, as hierarchies formed, as strangers began interacting with strangers who shared no prior relationship, clothing turned into a kind of social technology, a system of instant, wordless communication. Long before you could speak to someone, what they wore already told you who they were, which group they belonged to, whether they were a threat or an ally, whether they stood above you or below you in status. Clothing is a language, quite possibly one of the oldest ones we have. And here's the part we're sitting with, because it applies to you personally, right now. You get dressed every single morning without giving it much thought, but your brain is running something ancient and deeply social every time you do it. You are not simply selecting fabric. You are constructing a version of yourself to project outward into the world. You are negotiating between who you actually are, who you want to be seen as, and what the specific situation demands of you. That flash of discomfort you feel when you show up somewhere overdressed or underdressed or realize you picked the wrong outfit for the moment, that is 170,000 years of social cognition switching on. That is your brain running the exact same calculation your ancestors were running around a fire, long before any of them had a word for it. We solved the basic problems eventually. Cold, physical protection from the environment, but clothing never stopped there. It grew more detailed, more intentional, more meaningful, because it was never really about the body in the first place. It was about the mind. The part of us that understands on some level that we are always being watched. Clothing did not simply cover us. It created a version of us. We did not start wearing clothes because we were cold. We started because we became aware. Aware that other people could see us, and that awareness never stopped shaping what we chose to put on. Tomorrow morning, you will get dressed exactly like you always do. But underneath that ordinary routine, something far older is still quietly running. You are not just picking out clothes. You are choosing how you want to be seen. The same instinct our ancestors carried for 170,000 years. Subscribe to Ancivex.